Hello again. Today we are looking at the final chapter of Ruth. So far we have seen how the widowed Naomi and her Moabite daughter-in-law Ruth left Moab for Bethlehem. Once in Bethlehem, Ruth began to glean in the field of Boaz, a relative of Naomi's, who is identified as a Goel or kinsman redeemer. Last week, Naomi devised a plan to remind Boaz of his duties as kinsman redeemer. In practice, these obligations were extended to include a levirate marriage to Ruth, in order that the family name of Naomi and Ruth's deceased husbands could continue. Last week's lessons concluded with a cliffhanger because Boaz revealed that there was a closer relative than himself who had the right of redemption. Today we pick up the story as Boaz goes to meet with the other relative to see if he wants to claim his right of redemption. Reading from verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance." The closest relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," and he removed his sandal. Boaz goes to the city gate to meet with the elders and the other relative who is also a Goel. Most cities during this period had walls and a gate, and it was here that legal matters were discussed amongst the elders. The elders of a city who had the authority to endorse legal transactions were a group of men drawn from the rank of male citizens who owned property. Once the group gathers, Boaz addresses the other close relative, informing him that the land belonging to Naomi's dead husband Elimelech must be sold, and that it is his right as Goel to buy it back. This is the first we've heard about the land, and we know nothing else about it. Initially, Boaz only mentions the land, asking the relative to exercise his right as Goel and buy it. We know from previous weeks that the main responsibilities of the Goel was to redeem land that had been sold in order to bring it back into the family inheritance. The mention of land is significant because the central theme of Ruth is redemption, and buying back Elimelech's land so that it remains in the family is part of Naomi's total restoration. At first, the nameless relative agrees to purchase the land. However, he quickly changes his mind when Boaz adds that he also must marry Ruth. There could be a number of reasons for the relative's hesitation. It's possible that he already has a wife that might object. He may not want to have married a Moabitess, but the reason that he gives is to do with inheritance. This gets a bit complicated, so I've drawn a diagram showing levirate marriage and inheritance. Naomi has no more descendants, so it falls to Ruth to raise up a child in the name of her dead husband Mahlon in order to perpetuate his father Elimelech's line, and also to provide an heir to the property. The person who redeems the property and marries Ruth actually redeems it for Elimelech and Mahlon's descendant through Ruth. The land purchase would become the property of Ruth's child. This could mean that the inheritance of the other Goel's existing children could also be diminished. This complication proves too much for the man. He declines the offer and surrenders his sandal as a symbol of relinquishing his rights as Goel. Boaz then calls for the people and the elders to witness that he is buying the property and taking Ruth, the widow of Mahlon, as his wife, so that the deceased's name would not be cut off from his people. After Boaz makes his declaration, the elders and the people pronounce a blessing. Reading 11 and 12. All the people who were in the court and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. And may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman." While the patriarchs of Israel are often mentioned, this is the only case where the matriarchs of Israel are mentioned as a model for future generations. A similar blessing is still recited over Jewish girls on the Sabbath day today. The linking of Ruth with the matriarchs solidifies her position within the community. She is no longer a Moabitess, but an Israelite. The mention of Tamar is particularly significant because she was also a foreigner and her son Perez was born from a levirate marriage. The last section of the book is the birth of Obed and restoration for Naomi. Reading from verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbour women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now God is brought to the fore. It is he who enables Ruth to conceive, and it is he who has not forgotten Naomi. Isn't God gracious? The focus is taken off Boaz and placed on women again, particularly Naomi. The neighbourhood women praise God for restoring Naomi's future, and they ask that Boaz's name be famous in Israel, a reference to his being an ancestor of David. The relationship between Ruth and Naomi is acknowledged as the women honour Ruth's devotion to her mother-in-law, declaring that she is better to you than 7 sons. Then Naomi takes the child and becomes his nurse. This doesn't mean that Naomi feeds the child herself, but rather she becomes like a foster mother who engages in joint parenting. The women make the unusual declaration that a child has been born to Naomi. While this refers to the continuation of Elimelech's line, it also testifies again to the faithfulness of Ruth, because in reality, the child is not Naomi's son, or actually her grandson. The child continues Elimelech's line because Ruth has essentially become Naomi's daughter and is replacing the sons that she lost in Moab. Because of her love for her mother-in-law, Ruth actually gives birth to this child for Naomi's sake. The continuation of this family is because of the love and kindness of Ruth. We see here the outworking of Ruth's identification with every aspect of Naomi's life in chapter 1. Naomi's people and her God have become Ruth's, and now Ruth's son has become Naomi's. Strangely, it is the neighbourhood women who name the baby Obed, meaning one who serves. The name is connected to the idea of his being a restorer and sustainer of Naomi's old age. The last verses of Ruth are a genealogy showing that Boaz and Obed are in the line of King David, which is one of the main purposes for the book being written. For Christians, this genealogy is doubly important as we see the actions of the Redeemer Boaz eventually result in the birth of the great Redeemer, Jesus. In the last verses, we see how God restores Naomi's life. She who was once empty is now full again. She has gone from hopelessness to happiness and security through the loving actions of other people. We also see that this is the result of God's providential care. Throughout the book, we've seen God working behind the scenes to bring restoration to Naomi's life through her daughter-in-law's faithfulness, Ruth's meeting of Boaz, his dutiful acceptance as his role as Goel, and the birth of Obed. These were ordinary people leading ordinary lives, and yet God was able to use them in his plan for establishing a kingly line that would ultimately lead to the King of Kings. God is able to use ordinary things to bring about great things. Isn't he amazing? Aren't we often like Naomi? We can't see beyond our immediate situation, but we can see here how God has it all under control. In week 1, we discussed the barren areas of our lives. Now this week, I would like us to think about God's restoration in our lives. This can happen when we first become a Christian and our life is turned around. But it can also happen throughout our walk with Christ. Sometimes they are little things, but sometimes they are life-changing. And often we only see them when we reflect on how far we've come. I hope you have enjoyed learning more about this beautiful book of Ruth. Bless you all as you gather together in your groups for this final study on this topic.